In the West, the Grimm tales were initially banned, but soon thereafter reinstated, only to be challenged again in the late 1960s. The new critique saw them as promoting sexist and racist attitudes, forming distinct roles for girls and boys. Girls should be positive, industrious, and self-sacrificing, while boys should be active, competitive, and accumulate wealth. The growing discrediting of the Grimm tales led to the rediscovery of the Weimar political tales in the early 1920s. And many were rewritten to produce new roles and possibilities, to show that life and ways of living don't have to follow a prescribed pattern. What many of the new authors liked about these older tales were their ability to show the contradictions in capitalist society and alternatives to them, while asking themselves what the fairy tales repress and constrain in the imagination of the children reading them. To many of the tales reproduced the repressive atmosphere of the Biedermeier period and the hierarchical relationships of dominance and submission. So several authors attacked what they viewed as a male-dominated and directed society that revolved around the accumulation of wealth for private benefit and war not for survival, but for the justification of ego and for money. Andreas and Angela Hopf were an author team who wrote in 1973 the Fire Dragon Minimax, which is a good example of how this male-dominated system excluded children and outsiders, here a strange creature, from ever assuming the role of hero. They instead needed rescue or vanquishing. The story poses the question as to why the roles of villain, the rescued, and the heroic rescue have always been assumed to look and act a certain way. Hilda and Minimax the dragon become friends, but because of his appearance shortly after fire swept through the town, the knight sees an opportunity to rescue Hilda and scapegoat the dragon for a fire he himself created. Hilda contradicts the knight's account of events and brings many to question who is telling the truth. Finally, we see how critical minds follow up and check evidence, eventually chasing the knight out of town. The story provides children an early introduction to critical thinking, and it took the courage of Hilda to contradict the one in power, and then the people to follow up and see that the propaganda the knight was spreading was false and who he was scapegoating it with. While there were many other authors writing new fairy tales, one of the most popular in Germany still today is Janos, which is the pen name for Horst Eckert. In his 1972, Janos tells the Grimm's fairy tales. The tales he adapts are less didactic or programmatic, and instead he provides quirky, sometimes socially critical, sometimes nonsensical, sometimes ridiculous, sometimes open-ended, and always interestingly updated versions of the Grimm tales. For example, Janos updates the Grimm tale of Lucky Hans by bringing in the contemporary world and its challenges while painting the fortune of a gullible Hans who in the Grimm version is given gold and slowly trades down for a grindstone around his neck, and eventually he loses that, and then he's happy again to be rid of that burden. Janos is critical of those who do not engage in the world, not concerning themselves with the issues at hand, and the gullible Hans meets a much more tragic fate because it was also avoidable if he only paid attention. He is complacent about the war, his relationship, his possessions, and he loses his limbs, his wife, and his bird, and then he has to be happy with the little he has. In Little Electric Hood, Janos uses the humorous repetition of the same word, Elektrizität. In German, often reusing a word in different contexts with different meanings is seen as witty, more than tedious as it often is in English translation. So he uses this word electric to describe the narrative, and the overuse of the word points to the growing invasion of a child's space with electronic equipment and their over-reliance on them. The original tale carries so many sexual undertones so that Janos shifts towards a more Dadaist, almost nonsensical electric tale that provides the young audience with a very desexualized tale that also averts depicting violence, as it turns the wolf into an appliance itself. King Thrushbeard will be one of the tales that we take on in the coming weeks under the theme of beauty and vanity, but you can get a sense of the tale already from this adaptation. In the Grimm's version, a haughty princess is taught humility through a series of tests and deception by a king that she at first judges too harshly and rejects. In the Janos tale, the princess is really out of touch with reality because she has grown up knowing only wealth and has made her selfish. She decides she will marry the first bum she meets and reject all material comforts. So eventually the princess and the young man are unable to survive, often living without income, starving, cold. And they find out that their love alone is not enough, and they both return to their parents. They do get a happy ending as that we see them reunited, as each was the child of a wealthy businessman. So Janos challenges the idealism of the counterculture, who espouse that all you need is love, while also the hypocrisy of those who are destitute by choice and can easily return to their comfort and happiness after toying with the idea of poverty that pervades others' existence. We will also be covering Rapunzel in the coming weeks for Janos. The tale provides an opportunity to critique consumerist culture where wants are never met, but only build addictions, as Rapunzel gets treated like an addictive substance where each time a tolerance that is built up requires more and more to be ingested with the fear of death like withdrawal. It introduced a very difficult topic to a young audience in a way that is understandable and not laden with prejudice or fear. In a humorous twist, the deal with the neighbor witch to continually supply Rapunzel in exchange for a baby is mediated by the ever-growing consumption of Rapunzel. And because of this obsession, there is never any time to create a baby. The story works on several levels, as the voracious appetite of the mother can be humorous for children and provide more serious interpretation for older audiences. While the sense of injustice is hard to place, there is the initial immoral request by the neighbor, but then also its frustration, thereby making villainy hard to place, whether it is just that she never be compensated for her work. Hans My Hedgehog is another tale that we will take on in the coming weeks when we look more closely at the beast suitors. In the Grimm version, he is an unwanted and unloved child and finds difficulty fitting in, while with Janos, he is loved at home, but castigated by his peers. His solution is to look different, to use what has othered him as his signature style, to own that. And the message is that for a person on the outside, instead of seeking to conform to the expectations of others, to rather challenge the status quo and revel in your difference and apply yourself to the mastery of the skill, to do it well and let your confidence exude from your expertise. It also makes the case that higher learning is not everyone's path to a satisfying life, which is echoed in the school reforms of that period that are being implemented. In the last of the Janos tales, we will examine the queen bee, and it'll also be a tale that we cover in the coming weeks. But in the Grimms, the bees are helpers, and they thereby help the young man solve the puzzle as to who will be his wife. In the Janos tale, we get to see how the three brothers choose differently with different motivations. While the older brothers harass the youngest, their choices are significantly different, and they unravel over time. Their boasting and licentious behaviors leave them penniless or imprisoned and abandoned. All their plans and machinations to get ahead are frustrated and fall through. The youngest brother, however, remains where he is, and just what he needs comes by. The couple in the simply wishes and stakes that they have in their lives allow them to live happily together. The tale provides a model for young readers to not let ambition and pursuit of wealth guide their decisions in the domain of love, which is better left to fate.